Well, the time has come for a video a lot of you had asked for. It's time to paint the Revan helmet. So we're going to head out to the shop and get started on it. So this is a clip from my PLA bonding video that I've previously put together. We went over how to bond the pieces of PLA together. I actually used the parts of the Revan mask. For this, I use Scigrip 16. It's acrylic adhesive, works very well on PLA. I also will follow it up and do a little bit of welding on the backside to ensure that those prints stay together. So I encourage you to go take a look at the previous video. I'll put a link down in the description and it'll show you the complete bonding process. So just like in my other videos, we're going to start off by glazing our print. We're only going to glaze a few spots, like a pair where there's some bigger imperfections or where there were supports. So for the video today, I'm going to be using USC Pro Glaze. It doesn't really matter what kind of glaze you use. They all work very well. It's just a matter of getting some of the bigger imperfections filled in. We can use primer and put multiple coats of primer. This just makes it a lot quicker because this is, think of it more or less as a thick primer, and it allows you to fill those imperfections a lot quicker, and it sands really easy. Okay, so it's time to go ahead and sand the glaze. And to sand the glaze, I'm going to be using some 220 grit paper. I always do this dry. You should never wet sand any types of body fillers because they can absorb moisture. Now this process shouldn't take very long, probably about 5 to 10 minutes. You just want to make sure you are getting those edges feathered in nice and even, working in multiple directions to kind of ensure that you're following the contour of the part you're sanding. So after a quick wipe down with some alcohol, it's time for us to start primering. Now you could spray it or roll it however you want. You could get the primer on. For this one, I decided to go ahead and use a spray gun. And this is the D1 Drizzle that I talked about in a previous video. I know I used it to put clear on. I changed the tip out to a 1.7 and I wanted to see how well it could spray this high build primer. I had to reduce the primer a little bit, but as you can see, it sprayed the primer very nice. And I'm very happy with the results and how this came out. Don't be too concerned if there's some runs or drips in it. We're going to be sanding our part anyway, so it's not going to matter. So our primer's dried, just like in the previous videos. It's time to wet sand. So we're going to be using a little bit of our 3M 220. I'm going to be using a sanding block with some water. And we're just going to go over this and lightly wet sand it and try to smooth everything out. Like I said in the other videos, if you start sanding through the primer, stop. We don't want to sand all the primer completely back out. So if you start seeing the lines popping through, you're good. Stop there. So we went ahead and put a coat of our high build spray primer on, and because the Revan helmet is going to be a satin finish, we only need one coat and we don't need to wet sand it. We could paint directly over this. Now all we're doing to base coat it is we're going to use some Rust-Oleum Professional flat black spray paint. Nothing special, just make sure you're getting an even coat and you're hitting all the spots and don't have any of that primer showing through. Now keep in mind you could really use any type of off-the-shelf spray paint. It doesn't really matter. I prefer flat paint. It's really going to be our top coat that's going to dictate the sheen, what we're looking for on our final coat. So if you use the glossy paint, after you top coat it, it'll flatten out anyways. Okay, so now it's time for what is by far my favorite part of the build, and that's painting. This is when all that hard work you've done comes together. In the case of Revan, he's gonna have this steel look, so we're gonna do a simulated steel look, and he's gonna have some red highlights. And because of the red highlights, and the fact that I am gonna be putting a matte clear over him, a protective clear, we really cannot be using the graphite powder. I know this works awesome. I've seen a lot of people, and I've done it on Mandalorian helmets. But if you put that graphite powder on, you're not going to be able to paint over it, or at least if you can paint over it, there is no guarantee the paint is going to stick. So I stay away from that. So for the metallizing, making it look like steel, I'm going to use this cheap Deco Art Zinc paint. Also, we're going to be using a sponge. Now, all this is this is a mop head. I took the metal backing off, and what we're going to do is we're just going to take a scissors and cut off a chunk of this sponge. We don't need the whole thing, of course. And this is what I'm going to be using to apply this. So we got a little piece of sponge. We're going to get a plate. We're going to put some of this metallic paint on our plate. You can see it there. And all we're going to do, we don't want any hard edges, is we're going to kind of ball the sponge up and dip it in that paint. And we're just going to start applying it onto our helmet. Pretty quick process. We're just going to go over the whole helmet. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now, one other thing I wanted to point out, when we're doing areas like the back of this helmet, we don't want to get into all the corners. We're looking for those highlights and those lowlights. So as we do this and it starts coming together, we're actually going to be washing out some of those little corners inside too. So you don't jam it into the corners. You want to leave some of those areas blacked out. Okay, so now that we got our first coat on him, we're just going to let him sit and completely dry. It's acrylic paint, shouldn't take very long, maybe about a half an hour or so. Okay, so now that we got our part and it's dry, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the same brand. It's the Deco Art, but this is a Shimmering silver. It's a brighter silver. We're going to put a little bit of that on a plate. We're going to blot the majority of this off. We don't want too much on our sponge. We're just going to use a little sponge. And all we're doing is kind of highlighting some of these edges. It adds quite a bit of depth into our model. And we're going to go around and do this on all our edges that are sticking out, protruding edges. And we're going to also do it on some of these areas like up in here. Just kind of blend it in a little bit. So adding that little extra bit of silver in kind of really gives it that well-used, worn feeling. All right, so now our silver highlights have dried. Now it's time to go ahead and get him taped off to paint that burgundy color. I'm going to be using the same thing I used in my masking video. It's the Delicate Surface Frogtape. And then I got some fine line here that I'll be using to do the initial outline. So taping on this is relatively easy. We're just going to follow the curves that are already in the 3D print. Okay, so just like in the previous video, after we have it outlined with fine line, we're going to go ahead and fill it with our masking tape and real lightly score right down the center of the fine line. Try not to cut through the fine line, but this is going to give us our nice sharp lines. So we got our nice long piece. We're going to put it on there. We're just going to eyeball it. Get it as straight as we can. If you pull on it, this stuff's a little bit stretchy. It really does help you get it lined up and follow curves. So I think that looks pretty good just like that. Let's get all this out of the way. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to get out our tape gun. This is what it looks like. This is just for taping off edges when you're painting. What it does is it's pretty much just a roller that has tape in your paper, and it applies the tape directly to the paper as you unroll it. Just makes it more convenient. You don't have to have this. I bought this at a local box store. I do really like it, but that'll help us just get some paper here covering some of our other parts of the model where we don't want to get overspray onto it. So what I'm going to use for the red highlights is I'm going to use a little bit of this Game Air Scarlet Red. And we're going to be putting that on with our airbrush. I'm going to just use it straight out of the bottle. And put it on. We just want to dust it on nice and light. We don't want to hammer it on. We don't want to push any of that paint up under our tape. We'll put a few coats of it on until we're happy with how it looks. So really that's about it. We don't want a thick globby coat of it on. In a few spots you could kind of see through it, and I'm perfectly good with that because we want this to look really worn. Okay, so that only took a couple minutes to dry. We'll go ahead and get our paper off. So now that our red has dried completely, the first thing I'm going to do is put some shading back in here where it airbrushed the red. We're going to go hit all the corners. For that, I'm going to be using this golden shading gray. So in order to do put our highlights in and battle damage, what we're going to do is we're going to get a little square of sandpaper. I'm using 120 grit here. We're going to fold this, make a nice little, almost like a stick out of the sandpaper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab our darker of our metallics. I'm going to put a little bit, we don't need a lot, and a little paintbrush. And all I'm going to do is apply a little bit of this to the sandpaper. I don't want it gobbed on the sandpaper. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take our helmet and we're going to give it a little bit of battle damage. So there we go. Took our sandpaper with our paint, scratched it up, got our battle damage on it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a coat of matte clear coat just as a protective finish on it. A lot of you had asked in the comments what I do if I want to spray something matte or flat. What I use is a 2K matte clear. It's really just a flat clear, real low luster, about a 10% sheen, mixes 4:1 with your activator, just like we would mix our gloss clear. If you want to, you absolutely can go out and use a rattle can or a spray can of flat clear. The one thing I just caution you is do a little test spot, because sometimes if it's like a lacquer based type clear, it can lift the paint that you're currently putting on. So just like any other time we're spraying, make sure you're doing it in a well ventilated area, and always make sure you're wearing a respirator. And that really is it. It dries extremely flat. I think it looks real good. I'm not going to lie, that was a lot of work, but I think you would agree, very well worth it in the end. I know this video was a little bit longer than some of the other videos I put together. Many of you had asked for me to do a complete start to finish video. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and remember, just have fun.